the basic things we're going to be doing today, just for the recording. Next slide. So let's, again, briefly develop on what we talked about handbook before, but actually kind of maybe look at, got some slides with bits of module handbooks, but you can apply this. So yeah, the module handbook itself is very useful, but I have to be honest and say that when I was at university, I'm just saying, speaking for myself, I never actually kind of sat down and read a module handbook in one sitting or kind of did that. But what I will absolutely say is that I did refer to it a lot. So because it had so many things that were explanatory, so many little notes and bits and pieces, if you look in the right place for what you're wondering about, they will tell you about to some degree. So there's a lot of stuff that if you refer to it and you're, if you're like, what do they mean by that? Or what am I doing here? Or what is this? Then you can go back to that and it can give you so much information and help and signposts, etc. So it's really useful. It has your learning outcomes. Sometimes they're called overall objectives. Sometimes they're called objectives. Mainly they're called learning outcomes. And again, they absolutely spell out what the module is about. And in fact, I may have, I'm going to stop sharing here. Yeah, here we go. This is actually last year's module handbook, but I just want to take the time. So here are, there you go. On successful completion of this module, it's all a bit in yellow. The student should be able to. And you'll notice that this is, so all of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all of these things that it's asking you to do. And I'll pick a nice short one. Number 2, it says that on successful completion of this module, you should be able to relate enterprising skills to employability by demonstrating the relevance of and demand for these skills by graduate employers in their area of study. Okay, that's one. Now you notice it says by demonstrating. How often in number 1 it says develop enterprising behaviors. It also says expand an awareness of personal and professional strengths, capabilities and development. So these are all the things that you're supposed to be able to do. The fact that you're going to, via the use of a reflective log. So in other words, you're going to keep a reflective log to do this reflective practice with. So you notice it's not a list of things to know. It's a list of, and there you go. And there's another one, to demonstrate, that you have to demonstrate stuff. And how do you demonstrate that you've learned all that? Through the assessments you give. So that's me making that key link. That's why I refer to it as demonstrating your understanding. So yeah, and then assessments and what you have to do to you. Now the assessments I've actually got on this slide here, which will be after this slide. So when you've got your assessment, these are the key things immediately or very early on you should be doing. What is it? What are you being asked to do? So that's the question, that's the task. What are you being asked to do? Okay. Then find out and establish is it a presentation you're given, an essay, a class test, a report, portfolio. There's all different ways we can ask you to. A reflective log, as we've discovered, the reflective log may be something you have to keep. Then when is it due? When's the deadline? When do you hand it in? When, or if it's a presentation, when do you give the presentation? When is that? And then from all of that, you can work out when you should start. When you should start. Yeah. And it says here, I would give yourself, if you've got an essay due I would start working on it 4 weeks ahead of time, if that's at all possible. I would give yourself 4 weeks. Now, I give yourself 4 weeks because, well, kind of generally that I managed to get stuff done reasonably to a reasonably good standard in 4 weeks. Now, if you give yourself 4 weeks and you do it in 2 weeks, what happens? Nothing. You hand it in early, you have more time to work on it. That's great. But if you say, I think I'll take 2 weeks, and you discover you need longer, you're running out of time, you're causing problems, you're possibly asking for extensions. So, not extensions for your hair or anything, I mean extensions to your coursework. You're saying, can I get another couple of days? So that's why I would recommend 4 weeks. And if you find out, hey, I'm shit hot at this, I only take 2 weeks, then that's fine. But it's better to give yourself too long than 2. Under promise and over deliver. Right. So here's an assessment schedule lifted from last year's module. Probably this year's won't be much different. I'm not saying you have to look at this, but this is for follow this. You don't need to follow this exactly, but this is for the enterprising behaviours module. So you'll notice there are 2 pieces of coursework, a poster presentation and a reflective competency-based report plus appendices. So that reflective competency-based report is a very, very complex way of saying a reflective journal or a reflective account. So individual reflection. So we're asking you to write 2,000 words on what you've learned about yourself during this. Now, and that's 60% of the module mark. So if you got 100% for that, you get 60 marks towards your module. And then there's this poster presentation. I think this poster presentation is about your dream job or a job you would like to do, and you get together as a group and you start to work on it, and that's worth 40% of the module. So again, if you get 100% of that, you would get 40 marks. If you got a mark of 50% for that, then it would be, because it's 40% your mark, would be 20 marks. If you get 50% for your reflective report, then you would get 30 marks because it's worth 60%. These are both summative assessment. It just means summative means it's the final thing. It's something we take account of. It's an important thing. A formative assessment is more formative assessment is more building up to something. A formative assessor builds up to. It's like if you're doing an essay, we might ask you to do an essay plan, and that would be a formative assessment. So you would do something towards it. And you might be marked for it. Sometimes you're not even marked for them. But if there is a mark, it's a much lesser percentage. It's a much lower weighting. This weighting part, this weighting part, for fuck's sake. This weighting part here is much less for a formative, so it might be 10%. So if we're asking you to do an essay plan that's formative and helps you with the actual essay itself, then we might give you 10% of all the module mark for it. And then also it says when they're due. So the group presentation is week 10. And the actual summative assessment is the 6th of January next year, according to this. I'm not saying it'll probably be the same for this year. I just haven't had a look at this year's handbook yet. So there's lots of information that you can take on board, what it's worth towards your module, as I said. But as well as that, there's other things you should know. And the other things are well, make sure you know those things, when to submit, date and time, I showed you that. Do you do it in electronic form or whatever? The module handbook will tell you all of this. There's generally every assessment has what we call a cover sheet. So this cover sheet has all your personal details on it, the name of the module you're doing, the assessment you're doing, what your name is, what your details are. So you put that on, so when you submit it, we know who to give it to and who to mark. So if you ever forget the cover sheet, it can cause issues. So it's little things like that, remembering to put a cover sheet on, know the little things. I was going to say, for example, we are fairly strict on submission dates and times. We're officially strict. So if you just said, I'm not going to get this finished in time, I know I'll just put it in a couple of days later, but you don't talk to anyone, you don't email, and you don't explain to anybody that it's going to be late, that there's some problem with it, and you just try to hand it in, there's a chance that you will be 0 marked because it's late. If something's late, it's not worth anything. If it's recorded as officially late, then it's not worth any, it's 0 mark. That's not to say that if you are running behind for some reason, maybe there's a very valid reason that suddenly you've run out of time and you contact someone and you say, look, I'm trying my best. I don't know if I'm going to get it in time. Is there any chance I can get another day or whatever? This kind of thing happens. I wouldn't recommend it. Then they may say, yes, you can have another. And that's okay, and that will be acknowledged. But you've got to negotiate that. And it's not to say that whether they will or will not give you an extension or extra time. That's completely at their discretion. But I thought I'd make mention of. So that's one thing to be aware of. Another thing, the fine print, I call it, is, for example, as per our regulations. Now, there's a big document, it's got all the regulations. Again, it's not something I would recommend you read or anything, but if you're ever wondering about when something's late or about any particular thing in a module handbook that says, this will happen if you don't hand it in or whatever, the assessment regulations explain it in much more detail. So the point I'm going to try and do here, this freaking highlighter will work. Bet it doesn't. So students must not attempt to use the same substantive piece of coursework to meet an assessment requirements of another item of coursework, dissertation, or project. So in other words, if you do an essay and then you get another essay later on and you see that part of it is similar to another piece of coursework, you can't cut and paste something in. So you can't use the same piece of coursework or any other coursework for that matter, or use somebody else's coursework, because that's plagiarism. See, I'm never going to get a handle of this. What's going on? That's called. It's called plagiarism. And something will happen. Okay. We have what we call an assessment board, which discusses everybody's results. And if it comes through that we think you've used something from somewhere else, then there'll be a meeting and stuff. All I'm saying is, if you know that, it's very easy to avoid plagiarism. We will discuss plagiarism as we go. If it is your first time, if by pure accident you're involved in some kind of plagiarism, there's a good chance you'll get off with a warning. But the important thing here is that just be aware of the fine print of things to do, not to do. And plagiarism is one of the big things. But it's very easy to avoid. If you basically sit down and write all your coursework using your own words all the time, typing them straight in and doing it in that way, you will never be accused of plagiarism. It just will not happen. But what might be a problem with plagiarism is when you maybe look at something in a book and say, I'll change some words here and I'll write it in again. Or what some people do is they maybe copy in a sentence and then they change the sentence. that's always dangerous ground. That's always more problematic. But if you don't look at any books but type the way you type it in your own words, then it will never be a problem. Okay, that was a wee bit more than what I thought I was going to say there. Right, okay. So let's look at your assessment timeline. Okay. And basically, when you create, what you do is you create something that lays out all your assessments across your 3 modules, across your timeline. So immediately points out when everything's due. And that's the first thing to do. And then you can work from there. So all this is there's a sheet in the Padlet, which is just a kind of A4 example of this. And what I've done is, this is just an example, but I went through 3 possible modules you may have. And all I've done is I've put in the deadline. So this is when everything that's due for each model goes in. Okay. So then I know I've got an essay then, I've got a poster then, I've got group presentation, I've got another essay and another poster. So then if I move on, the next thing I would do with this, that's the starting point. That's the starting point. Then I go back my essay 4 weeks. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you'll see here, I've got start work on essay. So that I give myself 4 weeks to get it done. Here's my poster. I go back 4 weeks, start working on the poster. Here's my group prezi. I have my first group meeting. And I don't guess it, sorry. I have my first group meeting in week 3. So what I'm saying here is, you see that according to this, I'm starting my work in earnest in week 3, which is actually next week. And that's the main thing. That's the main point I'm trying to get across with this, is that you could be starting as early working on your assessment as next week, despite what the dates may tell you, despite the week saying, it's week 10 or it's week this or it's week whatever. I would argue once you get into it, when you've actually start to get closer together, the earlier you can start, the more you can spread the work out. Okay. And the other thing is, you'll notice that after I've done the poster event, I jump straight in week 8 and start doing the build up for my other essay. And then the same goes for this. I'll get this essay of 750. Then immediately after, you start working to build up to the poster handout. All I'm saying is, what it does is it starts to lay out everything. And then the next thing is, what it does is it starts to say, these are all the things that you're doing across any given week. So in week 6, I'm doing all of this. In week 8, well, that's a busy week. Do you know what I mean? I'm handing in an essay. We're working on that for sure. I'm reading for another essay. I'm delivering a group presentation. So that's a busy week. And the other sheet I give you, so this is you laid out roughly what you're doing, and there can be more than this. This is just a kind of rough thing. When we move to the next bit, what I want to show now is a weekly timetable where you can then say, I've got all this stuff to do in this week. When during that week am I going to do it? So I've attached this sheet. This sheet has all the days of the week. It has all the times in the day that you're liable to be conscious. I don't mean that, and you'll be awake. And also what I've done is I've ring fenced or marked out when the hours that you could possibly be in university. So the first thing I would suggest you do is you block off all the hours that you're in class. Okay, apparently our class isn't even this, but never mind, it's just a mock-up. But so these are all your classes, you would mark them in because you can't study or work when you're in the class. Okay, so you do that first. The next thing you do is you then block out times that for whatever reason, for any reason, you know you're not going to work, you're not going to study, which is fair, it's your choice. Then you can say, well, I'm not going to be doing work in between classes. That's not enough time. So I'll put those in. I'm not going to study after 7 o'clock at night because my heart's not in it. I'd study better in the morning or whatever. I'm not going to study on a Saturday or a Sunday because maybe I've got a job. Or I go and see my granny and look after her or go and visit her. But it doesn't matter what it is. You've got to be honest. You may not work on a Saturday morning because you've been out on a Friday night. I'm not, and that's not a judgment. All I'm saying is be honest with yourself. Don't leave it all open and say, I'll work all the hours God sends if that's not the case. Be kind of accurate about it. Be honest with it. And then what you start to see is these areas where you can study. So you've said, right, these are the times in the day I can study. So let's pick a week 5, and start to put in when I'm doing my work. So I have a group meeting. Apparently you've got a 4-hour group meeting. This isn't, I'm not saying this is an example. So I'm not saying you've got a 4-hour group meeting or you're actually going to spend 5 hours or 6 hours reading for a report. But what I'm saying is you can parcel up that time and do whatever you want. I've kind of did this so it's easy to read from a distance and stuff, right? You know, you could do it in much more detail or whatever. So then you go week 5 and it's all planned out. It's all planned out for you, which I think is really good. And there's 2 benefits to that. The first benefit is, I can't remember, so I'll just look at the sheet. First, yes, the first thing that this shows you, if you come together with something like this, and you might have a better system or you might have to do it a different way, but you say, yeah, I'll do that. Last week, I talked about taking responsibility. Last week, this independent study is down to you. Doing something like this and something like this, both of these things show you're taking responsibility for your studies. You're taking it seriously. You're making an attempt to say, like, let's plan this out. I'm studying independently, and this is the way I manage myself to do it. That's the first thing. That's the first, I guess, benefit because you demonstrate taking responsibility. The second thing is that often procrastination, I argue, procrastination happens because you don't have a plan. So you're kind of like, yeah, I should do something. When will I do it? Oh, I'm not sure. Just leave it. For me, this at least sets up a plan which you may or may not follow due to procrastination. You may procrastinate and put things off, or but at least you know when it's going to be, and you give yourself the opportunity. So that's really useful. The other thing I want to say about when you mark off all the time you can't study, if you do mark off a lot of time because you're working, at least then you're making yourself aware, and this is quite important, you're making yourself aware when you mark it off, how the time for you to study and achieve everything you want to is more limited than somebody who doesn't have to work during term time. As I said in the induction talk, I didn't need to work during term time, and this opened up this part of the week for me, that I had so many opportunities to study. It made everything a lot easier for me. So if you do work a lot, this will help you identify how limited time is, but help you make the best use of it. So it's all good. I don't think there's any negatives to this. Again, as I say, there might be a better way of doing it. You might have a different system. You might not use stars. It doesn't matter. But that to me is the biggest take home. The biggest take home from this week